Hello, everyone. I'm just waiting a moment or two to let everyone trickle in. Okay, and we'll get started. Well, hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's conversation. My name is Namulan Bayar-Sehan, and I am the Education Director at the Aldrich Contemporary Art Museum. The Aldrich is located on the ancestral homelands of the Wappinger and Munsee Lenape peoples, a place known as Richfield, Connecticut today. We are a non-collecting institution, and we present new exhibitions by living artists and thematic group exhibitions throughout the year. And I'm really delighted to introduce our speakers who will be delving into their shared interests, including the literary works of pioneering science fiction author Octavia E. Butler. The program is associated with our current exhibition, Chiffon Thomas, The Cavernous, organized by the Aldrich Museum's Chief Curator, Amy Smith Stewart, and on view through March 17th, 2024. On Saturday, February 3rd, we will be presenting Polish, an hour-long performance inside the galleries created by artist Chiffon Thomas, and I encourage everyone to please join us for this special event. An artist, Chiffon Thomas, is a multifaceted artist whose practice incorporates embroidery, collage, and sculpture to explore the self as split, fractured, and transforming. He contends with the crafted body in his work, examining wider issues of gender, race, and sexuality. Thomas holds an MFA from Yale University and a BFA from the School of Art Institute of Chicago. He has completed prominent residencies at Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture and the Fountainhead Residency. His work is in the permanent collections of the Studio Museum in Harlem, Hammer Museum, Institute of Contemporary Art in Miami, Florida, and many more. He is also the 2022 recipient of the Joan Mitchell Fellowship and is represented by Kohn Gallery in Los Angeles. In addition to Chiffon, I'm thrilled to have Dr. Alyssa Collins here with us in conversation. Dr. Collins is an assistant professor of English and African American Studies at the University of South Carolina. She served as the inaugural Huntington Library Octavia E. Butler Fellow from 2021 to 2022, and her research focuses on Black life, humanity, and technology, as represented in the presence and futures of Black speculative fiction. She's currently working on her first book titled Cellular Blackness, Black Feminist Posthuman Ontologies, which is an investigation of Black female embodiment, human evolution and symbiosis, and Black posthumanity as established and represented in the works of Octavia E. Butler, Nnedi Okorafor, and other contemporary Black science fiction writers. So we have two incredible speakers tonight, and during tonight's conversation, please include your questions in the Q&A chat at the bottom of the screen, and we'll try to address those at the end of the program. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to you, Dr. Collins, and I'll be here in the background.
Thank you, Namulan, and thank you to the Aldrich for inviting me. I'm so excited to talk to you, Chiffon, today. So I think that we'll be able to talk about Butler, we'll be able to talk about your work, and it'll be really fun. So,
Amazing.
Yeah, are you ready?
Can I, should I call you Dr. Collins?
You can call me Alyssa or Dr. Collins, whatever you want. But Alyssa is fine.
Okay.
So I guess when I started kind of looking at your work and engaging in your work, it evokes a lot of the same themes or similar themes that we find in Octavia E. Butler's work, including kind of relationships between different kinds of knowledge production, different kinds of embodiments and relationships between architecture, humans, and species, and kind of moments of possibility. And you also seem to kind of engage in some of the philosophical approaches. You guys are kind of kin in engaging in some of the kind of philosophical approaches of possibility in your art and in dealing with ambivalence and maybe even contradiction. So these are all things I'm really excited to talk to you about. But I think what I'm going to ask you first is if I would love to know if you have a favorite Butler text or idea or concept that she engages in her work.
Yes, I actually was trying to review as much as I could from the past few years that I started with some of her novels. And I think I'm actually kind of torn between her short stories and Blood Child and Wild Seed. I think I love them both for different reasons. But honestly, I really love Wild Seed, and I feel like I don't hear enough people talking about it. And the crazy thing about that is when I did my first year of undergrad, I actually did it at DePaul in Chicago. And then I went into the School of the Art Institute the following year. But that year at DePaul, I had an English lit class, and it was a part of my prerequisites. And the professor at the time had actually assigned us Wild Seed on the curriculum. And I did not read a single ounce. I didn't read that book at all. I don't know how I passed that course, but I didn't read that book. And I feel so regretful that I hadn't read it sooner. So something just, I had like a recall of a memory when I entered graduate school, and I was curious about it, and I ended up picking it up again during my time in grad school, and it blew my mind, and it kind of manifested into a body of work that I made for my thesis show. So, and then I ended up reading it again just to refresh myself. I think probably over a year ago, and I think I keep returning to it because it was really impactful that first time having experienced it, and then those feelings around not reading it back in like the early 2000s. But I think I know you didn't ask this or if you were going to, but what I love about it is just she just really develops these two characters and just their dynamic in a way that she kind of creates this villain that you absolutely cannot stand. Doro and both of these two individuals pretty much are immortal beings. And the difference between Doro and the second main character,
Anyanwu.
Anyanwu, yes, she is she just has like a vast range of abilities on top of her having immortality. And then you kind of get a sense of just different species and like natural life that she has the capacity to shapeshift into after she gets a taste of their flesh. So I remember one part of the book, she becomes a dolphin because she gets the opportunity to taste the dolphin's flesh, and then she could embody it and then understand its biological makeup on a molecular level to the point that she can figure out how to transform her own cellular structures to become that dolphin and then be a part of their community. And Doro is like this antagonist in a story that can end her life. He can actually take this immortality away from her, but they're constantly like bumping into each other at different decades and different centuries. And she finds that she could change into this dolphin and be a part of this community, or she could become an eagle and she can escape him. and kind of like camouflage herself, because they have like this innate magnitude towards each other because they both share this ability to be immortal. But I just love how she must have done deep research on each species that Anyanwu can transform into, because you feel like you are literally communicating with some of these animal species, just the way that she describes their emotions, or like nonverbal cues on how they connect with one another, and you feel the intimacy between them, and it's that was the most interesting thing to me.
Yeah, I mean, I love how you chose two texts, Wild Seed, where you have these two characters who are kind of in this weird relationship of like building a kind of a psionic race together, but with all of the additional superpowers that that entails. And we have Anyanwu, who can definitely like really commune with different species around her. And you love Bloodchild too, which is also a story about a colony of Earthlings who land on a planet, and they have to be in relation with these like insects that are interested in are asking them or compelling them to help them continue their own species. And both of those texts are like, you know, dealing with kind of the coupling of bodies or them being in relationship with one another, and the cellular. And I think those are two of my favorites too. And I think that we're like um, that kind of question that Butler has is really interesting about the body and like where it starts and how we define humans, even, right? How we define
Mm-hmm.
humanity and what we do with the kinds of knowledges that we have around biology, and like how we might extrapolate um, having relations with others on the planet or even others on a different planet. I
Mm-hmm.
think that's pretty cool. And whether those relationships are like good or bad or difficult um, are things that she keeps returning to.
I love that. Like, actually, you just saying that is, I haven't had that version of language in these bodies of work, but where does the body begin and end? Like,
Mm-hmm.
where is it? Well, for with these works, for example, are the geodesic domes, these architectural industrial forms, the body as well, or are they extensions that have been applied onto the body, or did they e- evolve literally from a biological stance out of this figure, and can it be respectfully so that the two are both biological in that sense? And I think that that's where that kind of like ambivalence and conflict, you're never really sure if even a body itself is industrial material. It has very realistic elements to it, but it has this patina on it that makes you feel as though these architectural tetrahedrons and the steel that composes them are still of that human flesh.
Mm-hmm.
Is it also fleshy? So it kind of keeps turning in on itself like that.
Yeah, definitely. Like, what is flesh? What is the human? Um, I know, and we could kind of talk about this more, but I'm curious if if in this kind of ambivalence that you offer to your viewer in like contradiction, I know that that's like a kind of provocation of the work, but I'm wondering, do you have feelings about like how and I didn't ask you this earlier, but do you have feelings about like where it stops and where it ends, or is it very much like a provocation to yourself as well? Do you, I don't,
Um,
I mean, like, and also,
it's interesting. Do I have feelings about? I think I try to make sure that the uncanny is always present. So I do like things to have uniformity to them and a seamless kind of flow one into another, so that it feels like it can de-evolve just as much as it can evolve, or just this nature of transforming. So I feel like with these works that they might, to me, when encountering them, they feel like they might be in a state of like molting or like transformation, or that you probably haven't seen its final form. And then a scale shift kind of goes into that too. Like, what is this possibility? Will it become more of this material as time continues on, or will it remain? Is this the final state? So yeah, I
No,
think I
that's really
answered your
cool.
question.
No, you definitely did. I mean, I mostly ask that because if we're thinking about Butler and the work that I've been able to kind of do in her archive, she often leaves things to feel ambivalent for readers. And one of my
Mm-hmm.
questions was like, what does Butler actually think about this? Because she can be very specific and direct in her own kind of research to herself. So I thought I'd ask you if you, to peek
Yeah,
behind the curtain, if you will.
what is an example of her research being more direct? Because it's, yeah, I feel like it's always this openness to how she writes characters, especially just the interchangeability of like their sex, and it
Mm,
almost happens effortlessly. Like, and that to me is she's the only writer that I have read where it's like so seamless that you kind of question, well, what is this form like that she is building characteristics around? Like, I sometimes I deconstruct the characters that she's describing so much that they just become kind of like a blob that has like a reflective surface or
mm.
something, like kind of like, or like even the way that an octopus can just camouflage itself quickly into, like, I it's the only way, because it's the seamlessness in how she can change a character's sex or their entire species altogether, that I'm like, well, does she have like direct stances within, I don't know,
I think
worlds that
that,
she builds, rules?
yeah, I mean, I think that one of, I don't know if Butler would say that she has rules, but I think that there is a interest in possibility and connection. Some of the work that I do, I'm really interested in her interest in science. And so there are a lot of kind of systems theories that she's interested in, like something like the Gaia hypothesis, which is a kind of has been metabolized as an old argument about the connection of species and microbes and the Earth's entire kind of biosphere and how we all work together to kind of live. And so like and to like keep the planet going. So it's both a kind of, thinking about the planet as being a living planet, there not being as many boundaries between species and organic life and inorganic life and non-human or non-human relatives. And so I think that she brings a lot of that possibility and that interest in resisting a kind of determinism into all of her work, right? Whether it be Anyanu
Mhm.
turning into a dolphin and that being like great, or her ability to kind of turn into a dog. I don't know what happened. Oh, okay. Her ability to kind of turn into animals, but also, right, like you mentioned that she turns into a dolphin in that same book. She also is able to become like a white man during the antebellum period at the same time, right? So that
Yeah.
fluidity is always there, right? That kind of structuring possibility and that operation of cells and connectivity seems to kind of, especially in that book, be something that she's very interested in.
Yeah, I actually I didn't realize Blood Child was just focused on that story. I get most of her text through Audibles. So when I downloaded Blood Child, it actually had a series of other short stories of hers also. And that was the first one where um the male characters can be impregnated with this
definitely
alien, with this extraterrestrial life. And then she does, at the end of each of these short stories, she does it afterwards, where where I realize how she kind of constructs things that feel very parallel and real amongst like the unbelievable or fantasy or something that is to come. And one of them, I can't remember the title of it, but there were characters who they had an adverse effect to, I don't know what it was, but it started to take away their capacity to speak.
Oh, speech
And
sounds.
is it speech sounds?
Yeah, I think so, right?
Yeah.
It starts on a bus. The character starts on a bus and
Yes,
people don't speak anymore. Yeah.
and they can't communicate with one another. And then afterwards, those afterwards were so interesting to me because she told the readers that she kind of developed these characters around Huntington disease and a couple other ones that I cannot remember that cause the mind or like certain mobility to deteriorate over time. But I'm like, oh, you were like pulling from real world biomedical diseases and then she's able to add a little bit of her own twist to these stories or which I guess though, yeah, those are the parameters that she sets for herself. But I don't know, I work in a similar way too. Like I'm thinking about something that we have encountered in the real world and then expounding on it or like joining these two things together that already coexist together. What does it look like to actually fuse them together literally? Like a literal example of that.
No, that's very cool, right? Like that joining and like what possibilities that kind of stuff offers.
Yeah, or what it looks like.
What it looks
like. What would that look like if somebody, I mean, some of the extraterrestrial life she describes with tentacles or like the depictions that I've seen on Google are just they're not the best.
The fan art is not arting the best, but it's an I think it's like an earnest try. There are a lot of attempts. It's from love. It's like an art of love. They're wonderful.
It's the art of love. Yes.
Yes. I mean, if you have time, like in the Huntington, she has a couple of doodles of some of her aliens that might be of interest.
Wow. All right. Can anybody just visit the archive?
Yeah,
Really?
you just have to make an appointment. Yeah. You definitely
so much
could.
wasted time. I'm gonna do that.
No, definitely.
Yeah, I want to see what she envisioned these beings to look like. I literally, like I said, I kind of can just see them become a form of an octopus. They slip into different skins so easily. And not in an abrupt way. It feels very casual. I like that.
Like it's not I won't say it's understated, but it's very matter of fact that like all of a sudden kind of, she can be all these different things, and it's just she knew she could do it, right?
Yeah, she knew she was confident about it.
She was confident about it, yeah, definitely. I'm wondering, I don't know. I'm wondering if you would be interested in talking a little bit more either about embodiment and materiality in your work or in the hybridity or kind of contradiction. I think we've started to talk a little bit around those things, but I'm wondering if you'd like to talk more about either or something else.
Yeah. I could do embodiment and materiality because
Yeah.
it is a shift in material
Mm.
that goes along with the shift in scale. And I
Right.
think that um, I wanted these beings to feel like something that was a sacred space, but also this, is it fixed? Like, is it a static thing? Is it immobilized? Like, how can it be both? How can it be stuck in time and space and position, but have this sacredness to it, or like this, I don't know, kind of spiritual interior of possibility? And that's where
Mm.
a lot of the difference between the stained glass or the mica stone sheets that are translucent enough for there to be a glow that is pulsating from the large scale domes. I'm thinking about how light can transport through this structure, and like how you do have the capacity to see inside, or physically being inside the larger dome, which I'm actually going to be returning back into to do a performance next month, where I'm activating the light elements inside of it through sound, through sound waves and percussion drumming. And the smaller scale works, they feel kind of like these sacks, like these orbs, or, and they still have the ability to be illuminated. So I wanted them to have the biological qualities while also it going into this very frustration of a person, is concrete person, is in industry meeting biology. So this kind of bio metamorphosis that's occurring, and you don't know which one is going to envelop the other. And the same with the mica and the bodies that look like they're rusted metal are actually polyurethane that have been coated in a metallic paint that could be patinaed. So they're very lightweight. They're not actual bronze casts of a body, but they still feel very solidified into this material as if they are bronze. And yeah, I just wanted that play on like this kind of like holy space that we associate like light with, and like not this not opacity within how these buildings are designed, or cathedrals that have like this grandiose quality, but it's also very like you have the potential to use just the natural light to illuminate a space. And it also came from being really interested in the oculus that is attached to the Pantheon Dome in Rome. And I had been building a body of work off of just this oculus, and like, what does it mean to be surveilled? And what do windows actually do? What does translucency actually allow? It allows you to have like a notion to see, or um, to be seen. So that's kind of where the material came from. And I just feel like our bodies are extensions of these developments of our habitat, of how we worship, how we create spaces of worship, and like what we relate those spaces to. And when you see stained glass, you can immediately associate that with cathedrals. You could immediately associate that with religion. And yeah, even this form of this dome is this otherworldly type of spherical object that it feels out of place, but it also feels very familiar because we start to look at our own structural anatomy, or our head, and then our bellies, or like breasts, things that are curvular, that it doesn't feel too off centered. And it kind of can feel like they can work together, that the body is dependent on it, but also you're never sure if it's being limited, which is why the different poses You'll see this precarious pose of this miniature body kind of hanging off the edge of these bricks. So is it aware that it's on the edge? Is it being supported by that dome's weight that it pulls it back to the wall so that it could brace itself? And yeah, it's just those different levels of play and activation too with these forms. Yeah, they feel fixed by the material that the anatomical body has, but okay, so then why is it able to glow? Why is it able to pulse? Like, well, now why is this able to feel like it has a resemblance to skin? Like, is this thing dead or alive?
Yeah, I think it's really cool because you in these pieces have kind of pulled together all of these things in a very Butlerian way that feel like they don't quite fit together or that are different ways of knowing, right? Earlier you mentioned kind of like the industrial and the sacred, which are things maybe I feel like they don't really go together, but I guess maybe if you really love industry, maybe that's both. But right, or like the kind of play of the biological and the industrial infused movement, right? Where we can both think about how these things are fixed, but also how, like in your performance, you'll evoke movement through music, right? Through vibration, through all of this stuff that I think is really interesting and in conversation with kind of what Butler is interested in doing in asking us how to approach the world, how to approach different kinds of fields of knowledge that we think we understand with different sorts of possibilities, right? If we think about if we think we know how to do science, Butler starts to open up conversations about like what if we, think about science and I don't know, the possibility that a woman could be a dolphin or something, right? Like what do we do with those extrapolations? I think both are having very similar conversations that are super interesting.
Yeah,
Cool. Yeah.
I I can't remember the scientists that they were. I just recently listened to a podcast about biomimetics and biomorphics, but I cannot remember the woman who was being interviewed. But she talked a lot about how if we could harness what photosynthesis does without having to ignite things in such a hot way. That's the problem. We heat things up to a degree that it ends up creating problems like global warming. Like, and there's like a sweet spot that nature has already learned. It's already been set in place that these things they kind of operate systematically in a way that allows the ecosystem to just maintain this ebb and flow, this steadiness, but we mismanage it. And then it starts to eradicate land and then people, and then these like having these hierarchies that we want to conquer one another. It starts to embed itself in those different ideologies, and I thought that was so interesting, and also just I feel like it relates to science fiction in a
Yeah,
way
definitely.
that this idea of like taking what's already in nature and then finding a way to replicate it in technology.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what I'm really curious about, and using those things as a mechanism of the body and trying to really embed the human into back into the natural world,
Definitely.
using things that are familiar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that this conversation or this notion that as humans we've maybe gotten too far, we've strayed too far from our relationship with the natural world and like which we're part of an ecosystem and need to kind of relate to it as such is like such a kind of you know really important question of our time, right? And like how we might imagine that and rethink it and rethink our relationship with the earth. especially is something that Butler is interested in, that there's a long tradition of people being interested in it. And I think putting the kinds of embodiment that you kind of thought through in this exhibit, I think helps us think about those kinds of connections, or maybe starts to. But I wonder, I mean, I don't know if this is like, since you brought it up, since you brought global climate change up, I'm wondering if you think, and I'm prompted to ask you this question because it's 2024 and Octavia Butler has a book, Parable of the Sower. It's about a kind of apocalypse. It's about kind of the world radically changing and the United States kind of collapsing. And lots of people read it during the pandemic and really felt close to it because of the kinds of spaces that we were inhabiting and the kind of hunkering down that we were doing. And it got really, really popular and went on the bestsellers list. So I'm wondering, and I've been thinking about this a lot in my own work, it's 2024, and I'm wondering if any of these pieces in the Cavernous feel apocalyptic to you, or kinds of endings or kinds of new beginnings. Even I was just wondering if there is an element of apocalypse in any of these pieces.
Yeah, it's definitely like a post-human element to this.
Okay.
I definitely
So I
think
want
be on that
something.
trajectory. I was listening to some of her interviews, and Octavia Butler was saying that she was hopeful, and I will try my best to remain hopeful, but I feel like we should be coming prepared that this is a reality of this post-human, globe. What does that look like? Or what is the next species to dominate? Like, what is it look like? Is it a hybrid of what we once were or what we are? Is it in between? And that's why, like, the miniature domes, especially, you see one form where it's sitting on top of a pile of rubble of rocks. And I built this pedestal to feel like it was something that kind of like erected out of this institutional space, which just seems so strange and possibly out of place, that you have this debris coming out of a wooden floor, but then you see it on top of a wooden pallet as well. So you get in this kind of, is this new society, this new thing pulling from a previous time period and repurposing things in ways that they weren't originally designed to function as. So they're kind of like resourceful in this way. And it's a lot of coddling of the self, or like nurturing of the self, because of that feeling of just being unsure, the unknown and afraid, like a aspect of fears in that, and needing to like soothe the self, or needing to, I don't know, surrender to what's taking place. So a lot of the lounging of the bodies is like this kind of this surrendering that has happened and letting the next thing take over. Just allowing it. Sometimes that's okay. Like, you have to let time play its course. Things start and end. And that's okay.
Butler would be proud. I mean, I think that is that's part and parcel of some of her text. And we didn't talk about Dawn, but I think the whole Lilith's Brood series is a conversation about like what happens when the end of the world happens and humans need to decide who they're going to be in the future, and if they're even going to be humans at all.
Oh my goodness. So I didn't read Dawn, but it's I think it's a trilogy. I don't know if it's
but you read Imago. You read the end of it. Yeah.
I read, and towards the end of it, I don't know how she develops all of these characters, but towards the end, the main character, Joe Das, who is half alien, half human, he has engagements with humans, and it's a rare thing that human societies feel comfortable enough to engage
Mhm.
with these new beings. And every time the human says something like, we need to get our land back, or we need to like get the earth back to the way that it used to be, the main character always re-emphasizes and doubles down that it'll never be like that again. You'll never get it back. It's gone. That is gone. It's ours now. So you need to just accept. And he never wavers through the entire book. And it was like 5 instances where different characters would say that. And something about like this character just like her writing this character to be so reassured and confident that it's never returning back to its origin, that they knew it as, was it was kind of comforting to me. It was like, okay, like now I can move on, like just move beyond this now. Like stop living in the past. You're not gonna get that, so you need to adapt to what is present.
Yeah.
So
I mean, that kind of now what, or like, where do we go from here, or a kind of ability or a need or necessity to adapt and maybe adapt quickly. Seems to really be in like what the early things that you said to me when I asked you this question about apocalypse, when you were like, I don't have much hope, but like the things that you're saying, right, are kind of part of a moving forward, even in that kind of surrender, right? Like it's not
mhm.
it's not necessarily an end, but maybe a new beginning. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was interesting that you're like, I don't have hope, but also kind of talked about the ways that these structures kind of offer us moments to rethink or adjust or just kind of, you know, think through a particular kind of ending that might not be the full ending. And
Yeah, I
that's
guess
similar to
that,
what Butler's doing, in my
yeah, what
opinion.
is optimism?
I mean, I don't know if it's
That's that.
optimism, but it's
I
not
think that's making me
fundamentally.
wonder about that. What actually is optimism? Just being able, like I'm like, yeah, it's different versions of optimism to me personally,
Maybe it's
and
like a
it's
pragmatism, right?
I
That kind of knowing, that kind of knowing that it's
yeah,
not going to go back, and knowing that
yeah,
adjustment needs to be made. Like,
yeah,
the Butler's post-apocalyptic humans like yearning for a past and an Earth that doesn't even exist according to the aliens, right? They rebuilt the Earth.
hmm,
The old Earth that you lived on literally doesn't exist anymore.
yeah. It's a
Well,
pragmatism.
I don't know.
I'm gonna
Maybe
keep that
maybe it's
word.
something different.
No, I agree with that. I hadn't added that in, but I feel like that's something that I personally would like to build off of, is just being realistic about, yeah, now how do we put this new thing into practice, or be realistic about it. A little optimism in there and pragmatism. And
I think we only have a couple more minutes.
that's what I was looking at the time, and I didn't
Oh,
want to
this has
go
been so
too far
fun.
over.
Maybe we should just keep holding everyone hostage. No, I'm just kidding.
I know. Let's keep chatting.
Let's keep
Just
chatting. Yeah, but I guess maybe
that's
we talked about optimism, but I think I'm kind of struck by um this work and kind of the possibility of it. So in the short time that we have left, do you want to say anything about the possible and science fiction? Or you don't even have to say anything about science fiction, but I'm just struck kind of by the your methodology. It seems to kind of align with a lot of the things I like to read and think about, and like kind of the what if of things. So I don't know, maybe that's where we could end for now.
well, yeah, I actually Speaking of possibility, that miniature version and those works, the miniature versions were maquettes, so they would help me understand if making them large scale was possible and proportionately would it work, and not be very offset with like the shift in scale. And so the figure that is actually standing with that or black geodesic dome made out of silicone is something that I desire to see large scale. So the possibility of it not being this like host or like this housing unit is now being pulled up off of a surface that is topographical and now is being vertical, becoming vertical and placed onto the wall. And what would that feel like large scale? And how does that change like this function or this notion of it having like behaving like a womb or like behaving like a container? Like now it's upright and it's not for something to enter inside necessarily. And what does that mean? So
That's the,
that
like
kind
the
of possibility.
possibility. Yeah, it's like in
Yeah.
your methodology, it's like what is possible. Let's see. Oh, that's awesome. Thank you so much, Chiffon. I don't know if we
Thank
have any
you.
questions from everyone else.
Thank you both so much, Dr. Collins and Chiffon. It was so nice to hear kind of Butler's works in context with both your research, Dr. Collins, and Chiffon, all of your interests in the incredible work you created for this exhibition. If anybody from the audience has any questions, please throw it into the chat or the Q&A, and we'll try to address it in the last couple of minutes we have left. I actually had a question. I was doing a little bit of reading about Octavia Butler, and I had read that when she was writing the Parables trilogy, she had kind of written dozens and dozens of openings and so many different drafts that kind of weren't failures, but were drafts that she didn't continue with and kind of moved on from. And I was really struck by that, like that there were so many openings to these writings that she created, but that she didn't kind of finish that opening thought, and she kind of moved on with with something very different. And that kind of speaks in some ways to me of the way that I interpret your work, Chiffon. There's all these like incredible openings I get when I see your work. But does that evoke does Octavia Butler's process also evoke that similar kind of feel for you? Do you have a lot of like starts or false starts that you have with your work that you kind of abandon an idea and move on, but like it helps during your process?
Me?
Yes.
Me,
Yes,
me.
you.
Man, now I wish I asked Alyssa about these drafts. I
Oh,
don't
Alyssa,
know.
can you share more about these drafts with us too? Because I was really struck by
Oh
the
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, what's really fun about, or not, probably not fun for Butler, but fun for a researcher about those drafts is that she kind of was really interested in the parable duology. One of the things that the main character who develops a religion, Lauren Olamina, develops a religion that's about like getting humans off the planet into the stars.
Mhm.
And so I think in her work, really, she starts thinking about those missionary groups, those colonies that Earthseed kind of gets developed. And so there are all of these drafts where she's trying to kind of think through those relationships, and think through kind of what these colonies might look like, and ended up having to kind of double back to start at the beginning with like what Lauren's actually doing on Earth. So we get like a kind of terrestrial story out of what starts out as a kind of interplanetary, interstellar story. And there are also like millions of starts. So it's kind of like a drafting and then a return and then more drafting. And then it was supposed to be a much longer series. So a kind of abandonment too. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. Like a lot of starts.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
I need to read Parable of the Talents. I haven't had a chance to do that yet.
Oh yeah, it's
And
a lot
she was
different
supposed to
than
make a third
before.
one to that series before she passed.
Yeah, I think there's that one's almost finished, but she had like imagined, I think 5 or 6 books like about those colonies, as you know. And then we also have flashbacks. So yeah.
Well, and I
Well,
also think
oh, I'm sorry.
no, and I also think, well, I mean, I think that speaks to, in so many ways, like that creative process, it's like this really, challenging, kind of fraught thing at times, right? So it's nice to kind of read that story about Octavia Butler, but also Chiffon, and hearing about all the different influences and thoughts you have about your work. I thought that was a nice kind of analogy. But
Thank
yeah.
you. I don't know if I answered you about drafts, but
Mhm.
I have a couple. I think I have two hydrocal concrete bodies that are just stored in my ceiling somewhere that didn't work out. But it my drafts, usually the first thing that I produce is the best thing. And when I try to think too deeply on or approach something too structured, it just feels very cheesy and
Mhm.
it feels lacking sincerity. And I haven't tried to show them to people, so maybe it's my own internalization of them. But usually the first drawing or like the first carving of a pose is the piece you see. And it works because I think I'm working through problems while I'm making it, and that irregularity is present and or just off put, like or
Mhm.
just real, like how would I sit if I was tethered to this structure?
Mhm. Yeah,
Yes.
interesting. Um, well, thank you so much, Chiffon, and thank you, Alyssa, for joining us tonight. Again, I want to shout out Saturday, February 3rd, we will have a performance by Chiffon Thomas. So I encourage everyone to join us if you can. And again, thank you both so much. We're going to close that out for today.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank
Chiffon. It's been
you.
really fun.
Thank you. It's been so fun. Let's keep
Yeah,
chatting.
we definitely shall.
Bye, everyone.